As Chattanooga is covered in a thick layer of haze, so are people's thoughts and knowledge of autism. To better explain our point, we went to interview some random college students on the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga campus to see what they all knew about autism. So, first question, what exactly do you know, if anything, about autism?
Not much. I know that it's mental disorders that.
I know it's a very serious mental condition that people really don't take seriously, and it's not really mental retardation. They just need an extra little push that people really don't understand about.
I don't really know all that much about autism. I have a buddy at high school that he used to have mild autism, played football for us. All I know is that he used to say they used to have trouble just making eye contact and things like that, and that's about it.
Something in the brain, like something like this.
So, what exactly would come to your mind when you think about autism?
Well, I knew a couple friends back in high school that had Asperger's, and the first thought that comes to my mind is just help. They need help.
A little slower in some ways, but in other ways, they a lot faster than others.
Pretty much just that friend, and then I actually have a girlfriend that works with special needs, and I think of some of the kids that she works with.
Like a learning difference.
How do you think autism affects society today?
I think it's still something that our society doesn't know a whole lot about.
I'm sure it can affect it in many positive ways. You know, each person's unique, and each person can benefit to society.
Autism is being more diagnosed because people aren't just taking it as they're taking it more seriously now than they used to, which is great because then people can get the actual help that they need rather than just being put into these other classes that they shouldn't really be in to help them out.
Well, I know some people have negative opinions. Also, I think there's people who really support people with autism and don't treat them differently. And I think that's what the society needs.
And finally, can you describe autism in one word?
I would say terrifying.
Different, but not in a bad way.
Unique.
Unique, because I think it's unique to each person that has it. Just like
Now, after interviewing the college students on campus to see what the general public knows about autism, we will now go back in history to the beginning of our knowledge of autism into today.
It was with psychiatrist Hans Asperger of Vienna, Austria, and Leo Kanner, a Ukrainian living in Maryland, that were the first pioneers of our current knowledge of autism. Starting out in the 1940s, around the time of World War II, they both described children with social and communication impairments and had obsessive interests while disliking change to a strict daily routine. This led Hans Asperger to call them little professors for the complex knowledge of their main interest and began to classify them as the first autistic children. Later on, psychiatrists would expand on this knowledge after more research done on the group of psychological diagnoses. Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States and one of the co-authors of the Declaration of Independence. He was suspected of having autism because he had a short, fiery temper he was known for, especially when somebody broke his daily routine. When it came to other people, he was known for being socially awkward and shy. Mark Zuckerberg, the co-founder of Facebook and the world's youngest billionaire. He has always been suspected to have autism because he has always had above average intellectual abilities and he has always been socially awkward around people. Albert Einstein falls under the requirements for autism because of his reclusive personality, never looking anybody directly in the eye, being socially awkward, and sticking to a daily routine. Psychiatrist Hans Asperger, even though never proven to have it, was always thought to have autism. As a younger child, it was hard for him to make friends and was always known as a remote child. He displayed an intense interest in literature, oftentimes reciting lines of poetry to uninterested classmates and referring to himself in third person.
After a short history of autism, we talked to some employees of the Mosaic program at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. And what do you know about autism, and how has working in the Mosaic program helped you learn about people on the spectrum?
Well, I've always been very fascinated about autism. I know it is a spectrum of neurodevelopmental disorders or diagnoses, but what is really fascinating is that it truly is a spectrum, and the impact of ASD is different and it varies incredibly from person to person. So that makes it very interesting. And working in the Mosaic program since its creation has educated me every single day. We're lucky enough that we work with 40 plus highly motivated, highly respectful, highly dedicated college students who teach us about autism every single day.
The Mosaic program has taught me everything that I know about autism. I started off in 2012 with the program as a mentor, knowing nothing. And by nature of just immersing myself in this community, I have learned probably too much about autism and continue every day to learn. In very simple terms, autism is a multiple complex brain development disorders that are characterized by things such as social anxiety, executive functioning skills, social interactions, things of that nature that students on the spectrum very much struggle in, and we at Mosaic strive to help them navigate those sorts of issues.
What is your view about how autism is viewed in the world currently, and how you think it could be made better?
If you asked me this question 4 years ago, I would say that it's being viewed pretty negatively with all the media coverage, and even today the media coverage doesn't put autism in a very good light. But I do much believe that we're starting to see this change because of the prevalence of diagnosis in our community. You know, now as of 2014, 1 in 68 individuals are diagnosed with autism, and with that comes education and awareness and just more knowledge of how it impacts us as a community and also as individuals with ASD.
I think that autism is viewed as a disability, and it's viewed as a disorder or something that's wrong in your brain. And really what I think it is a neurodiverse perspective. I think that everybody's brains are wired differently, that we don't have this perfect brain locked up in a vault somewhere that we have to compare everything to. I think we really are, just like cultures are diverse and we have biological diversity, I think that neurodiversity needs to be respected as well, because everybody thinks differently, processes information differently, and then talks about that information differently as well. So I don't necessarily think that an autistic brain is less than, it just is different.
Okay, what misconceptions are there today about those on the spectrum, and how could they be explained better?
I think that unfortunately, all too often when there's mass shootings or there's violent things that happen, it's almost like we that work in the autism field can just count down the minutes until they say that the person had autistic tendencies. But if you really look at it, I think pretty much everybody in our culture and in our society has some sort of autistic tendencies, because autism is so vast and so widely represented. I think that we can instead, when these disastrous things happen, we could look at the person as an individual and recognize that it probably is not due to autism. Most often it's more due to some mental illness or other types of things that come up.
I think the most common misconception that people talk about with me is that students on the spectrum don't feel or express emotion, and I think that that's something that is very untrue. I think that people on the spectrum just have a different way of expressing their emotions and processing their emotions and perceiving and having this perception of emotion differently than other individuals who don't have autism.
Explain to us how the Mosaic program works and how it caters to those on the spectrum.
So our program, Mosaic, is a specialized program for students on the spectrum. We support students that are in our program through 4 holistic, multifaceted, comprehensive, whatever. The biggest component of our program is the actual Mosaic class, which focuses on social skills and transition skills and very much everyday life sort of things. Of our Mosaic classes, like for our juniors and seniors, our class focuses on like job prep, transitioning from college to the workforce. So interview skills, resume building, internships, jobs, workplace socialization, all those things that students on the spectrum might encounter, and they need to know how to navigate, so that it covers that. The other three components are encompassed by mentoring. All of our students in our program are required to meet 1 hour a week with a mentor, someone who's socially engaged, that can socially get our students involved so they can have a more well-rounded experience at UTC. Study hours. All of our students in Mosaic are required to do 4 to 6 hours of supervised study. And then the last component is coaching. All of our students are required to do 1 hour or 2 hours if you're a freshman of coaching, where that individual meets with our Mosaic staff member and talks about academics, talks about social issue, roommate issues, anything under the sun, academic issues that we then work through and help develop tools and strategies to help solve whatever issues come up. So that's Mosaic in a whole.
What we know is that although people on the spectrum are vastly different from each other, there are a few areas that everybody struggles with. We know that executive function is something that's very, very difficult, and what that means is there's about 6 steps to complete any single task. So we refer to those steps in this little cycle as an executive function cycle. So almost like having an executive assistant, having somebody there to help make sure that every task is completed, everything comes to fruition, kind of help manage everything that life is throwing at you. We also know that people with autism need to feel accepted and feel like they belong, and creating a community through Mosaic has allowed that to happen. We've seen a lot of growth when you get people that are like-minded in the room together, when before they've been isolated and didn't feel like they belong. Now all of a sudden they belong in this community, and we're seeing a lot of strength form from that. I also think that the curriculum that we teach, we've written the curriculum and it's published through Jessica Kingsley. A lot of other universities are adopting that curriculum just because it makes sense. And it makes sense because it was written from the perspective of a college student with autism.
After hearing about the program, we decided to interview some students that are currently in the program to see what they had to say. First question is, how has being on the spectrum affected your life?
A whole bunch of different ways. Just for starters, I think one thing that a lot of people have trouble with is you say things that you don't realize people will take offensively, and so you end up starting arguments without realizing that you said anything, or you hear somebody say something that's sarcasm and you don't realize it's sarcasm, and so you freak out. So it's stressful, definitely.
Well, I didn't find out until I was 17, which was really recently. I think it changed my life in a good way, because then I could finally understand more about myself.
How do you feel society views you?
I think negatively, because they either think that I'm going to be a brainiac like Einstein, or that I won't be able to function on my own.
I think because Asperger's is a less frequently known word, and people usually just use the word autism, they pick up on that. And there's this immediate link in society between the word autism and being what they call slow. So, people really, they think of us. I overheard a conversation in the UC one time where somebody was describing Asperger's to a friend of theirs. They were like these 2 stereotypical sorority girls, and they said something like, he's basically socially retarded. And I wanted to go slap them, but that's how society views us. So yeah.
How has the Mosaic affected you, and would you say it's positive, negative, and why?
I would say that it's positive, because it's definitely helped me get used to living on my own at college.
Oh, positive 1,000 times over. I was a little bit ahead of the curve because I had been in a lot of social situations in my high school days, so I kind of understand some of those social cues already coming in. What the Mosaic program really helped me to do was to accept that, because I started talking with other people who weren't quite there yet, but they could put words to those weirdities about themselves, and it made it make a whole lot more sense.
Would you change the program if you could?
I don't think I would change it. I like it the way it is.
If there's one thing I could change, it would be give them more money so they can get more people. Because I know there are a lot of people at the campus that I know, just from personal experience, are definitely on the autism spectrum, and we only have enough space and enough staff for about 48 people. There are 13,000 people on this campus, and it's growing, but it needs help a little bit, I think.
What misconceptions are there out in society today, and how you think it affects those on the spectrum?
I would say that people always view it as a negative thing, when really it's just we think differently.
Do you think, if you could, what would you change about society?
So I guess what I would change is have people realize that autism is a spectrum and that there are quite a few of us who are close to normal at least.
How do you feel accepted in society, knowing that you are on the spectrum?
I've learned to cope with it pretty well so far, so I feel pretty accepted, but I feel a lot of empathy towards people who I can tell don't feel that way, because it's a personal belief of mine that being left out is the single worst feeling a human can experience, even worse than the loss of a loved one. It's awful. So having to go through that every day, man, it's bad. Personally, I don't deal with that as much, but I know a lot of people on the spectrum do.
For me, a lot of people don't really realize it until I say something, and sometimes it makes people feel awkward being around me, but if they understand what it is and why I'm different because of it, I think it doesn't affect me too much.
And finally, can you describe autism in one word?
Crazy.
I'm gonna say confusing.
Now knowing other people's opinions and inputs, we decided to go ahead and do our own.
First, how has being on the spectrum affected you?
Well, first maybe a lot. It's maybe really organized. I guess a good student, and I always had like slightly above average memory until recent years, to where it changed to where now I do have a really good memory.
Disorder affected you? Well, really not knowing now, it hadn't that much, but it did a little bit. When I originally got diagnosed, I had like a deep spot, and I just felt depressed for a long time. But then eventually, as of like last year, when this all happened, and it just got much better. So how did you find out that you were on the spectrum, and what was your initial reaction?
Well, it was back in the summer of 2008 when I had just turned 11, the past spring. And before my parents knew that there was something different with me, they at first I was a late walker and a late talker. I didn't learn until like the later end, when they say young children are supposed to learn to walk and talk. Then once I got to be a little bit older, I developed a very intense interest in airplanes, and whenever with all that, my parents took me into somebody my father used to go to high school with, an old psychologist friend, and I guess we did some testing there, and I knew immediately that I was on the ASD, and I couldn't remember exactly how I would have reacted, since that was a good time ago. But
I found out because of a certain set of circumstances that led to me having to find a counselor, and then my parents started to look into it a little bit more, and then that's how I saw someone, and then I took a special test, and then they saw that I was on the spectrum and that I did in fact have some form of autism. And initially I was unaffected, but then I got a little bit more I got a little bit depressed, and then I eventually got better, and now I'm pretty comfortable with it. If you could change anything about your diagnosis, what would you change?
I really would like it if people on the ASD weren't always socially awkward like a lot of those on the ASD are. And I do like having the good memory and the tie organization and everything, but I'd say basically, I would just throw out the social the social impairments that those on the ASD have?
If I could, I don't know if I would do anything because where I am now is all dependent on what I've gotten in the past. And then how has the Mosaic program affected you, and would you say it's positive, negative, and then why?
Well, first, I don't think it's affected anybody negatively because it's the program that UTC has here for those on the autism spectrum disorder. But I would say, yeah, for me, just like everybody else, it's really kind of broken through with us and been able to make us. It's been able to help us with our social and, language, impairments, along, with all the other, disabilities we might have. And it's just helped me to get to know a little bit more about, our diagnosis. And I would say, yeah, it really helped me a lot currently. And I really do like it, being able to meet others on the ASD and getting to work along with NTs or neurotypicals to help us get better adapted more into an NT lifestyle.
I feel being in the Mosaic program has really, really helped me. Everybody has helped me with my organization skills, my work ethic, and I've really learned to get stuff done, and I've met a lot of people that are just like me, and I say this is very, very positive, and I enjoy every moment of it.
If you could change society's ways with those on the ASD, how would you change it?
If I were to change society's views, I would just have them be a little bit more educated on the matter, and a little bit more accepting. Understand that they cannot just generalize it. It's a case-by-case situation.
Well, I'd say it has been, gotten better in the past with society's views of those on the ASD, but I'd still say there still needs to be a paradigm shift. Only a light disability for most of us, and then there's always the other more, low-functioning people, more like Rain Man, but again, not all of them are like that. They only have more severe, language and social abilities than the higher functioning people. But yeah, I would just clear up the image they have, and get like those Rain Man pictures out of it, and